Hey, good day to you. It is day 3 of our study in the book of Mark. And today we're going to be continuing our introduction into Mark. So anyway, let's get started here. The book of Mark is a book, it's one of 4 Gospels, okay? The Gospels are the first 4 books of the New Testament. They are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all 4 tell the story of Jesus, all from different viewpoints, okay? So, let me explain the different viewpoints. Let me give you an example of something that happened to us recently. About a month ago, we went on a sailboat for the weekend, and while we were on the sailboat, some of us were fishing. While we were fishing one day, Myrna caught this fish, and so anyway, there's 4 different people on that boat, actually 5, but they each had a different viewpoint of what happened when Myrna caught the fish. I'll start with Myrna. She's the one who caught the fish. She basically said, hey, I caught a fish. And she reeled it in and she goes, look, I caught a fish. That was it. That's all she said. And she was somewhat excited about it. And she said, I caught a fish. All right. I came along and I said, wow, that's awesome. I got my camera out and everything. And I said, oh, that's an awesome fish. And so I told my kids about the fish. And I said, Mom caught this fish, and it was, that long. And it was just a great little fish. It sure would be good to eat that fish. And that's about all I said to it about that. Kim, our friend, she really likes to fish. Okay, she came along and she said, well, Myrna, you caught quite a nice fish there. That fish was 5 pounds and 3 ounces. It was 17 inches long, and it was, I forget the name of the fish, but she knew the name of the fish. And she said, that species is mostly in the Caribbean and in the Gulf, but not much beyond that. You're not going to find that in the coast of Africa or anyplace else. She could recite everything about that fish and tell us everything about that fish. And she could tell us what bait was the best thing to catch that fish. She knew all about the fish. So anyway, that's her story about the fish. Alex, her husband, came along and said, oh yeah, Myrna caught this fish. And he's more of a sailor. So he said, wow, we were traveling 15 knots. And she had, 50 foot of line out in the Gulf. And, as we were traveling along at this speed, the sun was in about the 11 o'clock position, and the temperature was 80 degrees. And he went on and on about telling the atmospheric conditions and the speed of the boat. The boat was 43 foot, and on about that. All the details about that. He gave very little details about the fish, though. So, anyway, those are all 4 different viewpoints of Myrna's story of the fish. And that's the way it is with the Gospels, with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, telling about the story of Jesus. Mark is he wrote the book to a Roman audience. So he doesn't say some of the things that some of the others write. For example, he has no genealogies. You won't find any genealogies in the book of Mark. Someone so-and-so begat this person and this person and this person. None of that. The Romans, they didn't care, okay? So that was the audience. He only quotes the Old Testament twice, okay? Where Matthew is big and Luke are big on quoting the Old Testament. And both Luke and Matthew are big on having genealogies because they're written to the Jewish audiences. And so they're, writing to the Jewish audience and verifying Jesus' identity and everything like that. So anyway, that's Mark. This is also one of the shortest books, but it's full of action. Mark is an author that he's writing mostly action stuff. Not a lot of the parables and so forth, but he's writing mostly the things that Jesus did, okay? And Mark is probably the first gospel written, and Matthew and Luke probably borrowed some of the material from that. And it's kind of like if I was well, I'm not in high school, but let's say someone wrote a blog on my senior year in high school. It was a classmate that wrote it and said how we went to the junior senior banquet and did this and stuff. I hadn't thought about that in years, and I had kind of forgot all about it. But as I read the blog, then it refreshed my memory, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that stuff happening. And as I remember that stuff happening, then I write a blog about it, and it's just, and I use some of that material because it kind of refreshed my memory, like, oh yeah, that stuff did happen. So anyway, so Mark writes it. He's the first author, it's believed, and then Matthew and Luke borrowed some of that material, which is perfectly fine. So that's what I wanted to get into today before we even get into reading Mark, is just the difference between the four Gospels. So what I would encourage you to do, though, as we're going through the book of Mark, read the other Gospels too. It gives you a different viewpoint. But we know where Mark is coming from, but we also know where Matthew was writing to the Jewish people. Luke was also writing to the Jewish people. So they all have different perspectives, and they're bringing all those perspectives to give us a clear image of who Jesus is and a clear understanding of who Jesus is. So my encouragement for you today is this: read all four of the Gospels. That they tell all the different aspects of Jesus. Don't just, it's good to read one. You can read one at a time. A helpful book that I find helpful is, it's called A Harmony of the Gospels. And it's a book, and it has 4 columns in it. And it lays out like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it will go side by side and tell you, how they're exactly alike. So like Matthew and Luke might be similar. So those 2 passages are side by side. And John doesn't say anything about that particular passage. Let's say it's a parable. And so those 2 are right together. So anyway, that's a helpful thing. It's called A Harmony of the Gospels. So go ahead and read that sometime. But I encourage you just to get into the Word, into the Bible reading. So that's it for today. We'll see tomorrow for day 4 when we start into Mark verse 1, chapter 1. All right. Have a great day. We'll see you later.